Did you know in one episode of reality TV, there could be 80 to 100 different tracks per episode, and that's just 1 hour long episode. And if you ever watch reality TV and heard a track like this,
that's serious. It wasn't. I'm like, I just thought I was bored, guys. I didn't say like that I wanted to.
This is called comedy or dramedy. These type of tracks are used all over for reality TV, especially in moments of gossip, awkwardness, lighthearted moments, funny moments, and this is the bread and butter of reality TV. Now, traditionally in TV, comedy tracks have sounds that sound like this. Now, even though we hear a lot of shows using sounds like these still, like on Bravo, TLC, we want to go with a more modern approach. That way we can stand out from the thousands of other tracks that people are submitting that are using these traditional sounds. So typically these type of tracks tend to be up tempo. Anywhere from 70 to 100 BPM seems to be the sweet spot. I personally like to work in double time, so we're going to tap out a tempo here. Now, with comedy tracks, typically what you hear are sounds that have a very plucky, short, and snappy staccato sound. So we don't want anything that sounds long and legato like a string or a brass playing for a long, sustained amount of time. We want to use sounds that don't sound distracting, that have a goofy or funny feel to it, as opposed to using sounds that sound very harsh and distracting. Let's give you a couple examples of how that might sound. So here's an example of a sound that sounds very harsh and outdated. This sound is more what we're looking for. Comedy typically leans for scales that have a major feel to them, so like this. Comedy feels a little bit more happy and dramedy feels a little bit more awkward. So something like this. Let's set this to 8 bars. So something I like to do with my comedy tracks is I don't like to have the line repeated. So if I play that next part, it's going to be something a little bit different to give a variation and leave space. A lot of dramedy and comedy is call to response. So this is the call. That pause right there, this is the response. You have to use silence as an instrument. You're gonna see me repeat that a lot as we develop this track. Silence is your best friend. For these type of tracks, we're making music for dialogue and not artists. So that's the first part of my melody, and I can turn this into a 16-bar loop. Change this end part right here to give it variation. Now that we have the bass line for our melody, let's come up with a snap or a snare just to give it some rhythm to move the track. Now that we have a melody, let's add some bottom into this and give it some bass. So something I like to use is Serum. And what I do to move quickly is I go to Splice and I preview the different presets they have, and then I just download it and import it into Serum. That way I'm not trying to sift through different packs. So here's one that I found from Splice called Bass Slap Golden. So now we're just gonna layer that main melody. Let's move it up about 5 BPM to see how that sounds. Now that we got that main part down, let's go over here and add some hi-hats to give it a little bit of bounce. I don't like to arrange while I'm making the track. What I like to do typically when I make any of my tracks is I make everything at once, so it's the full chorus, and then from there I put everything in its own little piece and kind of build a puzzle out from that main part. So what we're doing is just building our main hook that's going to be used in the last part of the track. I believe hi-hats are a huge part of bounce, so instead of me just doing a 2-step or a 4-step, I like to start off with the 4-step, and then from there I like to build the track from there. Adding little pauses and stuff and hesitations really helps me bring bounce to the track, so that's what I'm doing with this. Use Alt-U to add a roll. Now that we have that main part, we'll just repeat it. Control-B to duplicate. Next up, we're gonna add a counter melody. It's a cool sound, but it has too much delay. So we're gonna take that delay off and let's record something. All right, let's quantize this. Now that I have the main parts out, let's add some kicks and add a little bit more bounce to this track. Now, I'm just building out more drums in this track. I really like using sounds that sound a little bit different to your typical trap beat, right? So I like to use sounds that have a little bit of comedic elements to it in my mind. This is a good example of it. It's not too serious. Just need that one note. We can repeat it. I don't want to use it every single time, so we'll just offset it. Now I'm looking for a very thin sounding rim shot to add some counterbalance to it. Now, initially, I feel like a lot of us as producers tend to overproduce tracks. As I mentioned before, we really want to complement the dialogue here. So just what we hear so far is almost enough. I think I need one or two more elements outside of percussion to really make this track finalized. Now, everything you hear is pretty much in the mid to low range as far as the frequency range of all the instruments. So now we're going to look for something a little bit higher in octave to give it a different type of frequency range so everything blends together as a whole on the spectrum. This is what the track sounds like right now, and I want you to pay attention because this is where a lot of people make mistakes when they're making dramedy. Dramedy is essentially a mixture of drama and comedy, and typically when people are making dramedy or comedy tracks, there's one element that they use that makes it really dramatic or too tense, so too serious for the actual scene. So to separate this track from being dramedy or comedy, we're looking for that one final sound to lighten it up a little bit without sounding too dark. And this is what I mean by that. This could be easily drama by just adding something as simple as this, but we're not going to do it. So we're not going to add something like that. Instead, we're going to look for a different sound that gives it a little bit more of a lightheartedness feel. I really like the sound called Put It in Park under the Ultra Detroit 2 and a synth by Slate Digital preset. For this approach, we want to layer and not fill up too much space. There are going to be parts where I may put a couple of notes, but we're not going to overcomplicate it and fill up that space that we created within this track. Perfect. So we went ahead and added a little percussion tap. This is going to be great for the verse. And then the open hat. This is how it sounds with just the bass. Now we have all of our elements. Let's move on to arranging. First up, before I like to arrange, I want to name everything just to keep myself organized. Now that we have everything named, let's put it into a mixer channel. Everything has its own individual mixer channel. Then I bring it into the playlist. I split by channel. I drag in everything over and I start by basing everything off of a hook. So this would be a full hook right here. Then we would move into the verse section. Now I do want to preface that we will be taking out from this first hook. We want our last hook to be the heaviest part of the track. That way when we go into the sting has a nice big ending. So if you don't know what a sting is a little hit that's used at the end of a track. That way the editor of a TV show can transition to one scene to the next. You hear this a lot in reality TV. That way there's a clear transition of the scene ending. We're gonna shoot for about 1.5 minutes of length. This is our first hook. Let's get into the verse. This is where our dialogue is going to live in this verse. So what I'm going to do is just take out all of the elements that make this track sound very heavy and busy. So this is where a majority of our dialogue is going to live, within the verse. So the hook is going to introduce us into the scene. The verse is going to be where the dialogue sits, where most of the talking sits. So a lot of space is very important in this part. Earlier, I told you that silence is an instrument. This is exactly what I mean. So what you just saw me do is add a little space. This is going to be an edit point right before the track drops back into the hook. As I mentioned earlier, edit points and silence is very important. The reason being is that a lot of editors are almost like musicians or producers themselves. They're editing the track to the actual scene. So them being able to have little parts where they can cut out and match it to the scene and do little cool little edits with the track is really important. So we're going to leave silence and little spaces for them. I noticed when we got back into this hook that everything sounded pretty slow and on the tempo side. Instead of bringing this piano in immediately, we took that away, we added that low guitar, and we're gonna bring in this piano later. So what I'm gonna do is add a shaker loop at the end to really bring drive when we get into this last part, which is going to be the sting. Now let's build out this first hook. It doesn't need to have all the elements in it. We already have all of our elements here in this last hook going into our sting. I know it's backwards, but bear with me. We're going to leave 2 bars for the intro here. We're going to add a hook A. This is our first hook, which is going to be the lighter version of our track. Then we're going to add a edit point, which goes here. And then we're going to add hook B, outro, sting. Also, by the way, if you're looking for more information on how you can actually break into sync licensing, I have 7 years of music supervision experience working for a major music library. If all those terms don't really make sense to you, or you're looking for how to actually start and make this a career path, I have a free masterclass that you can attend. All you gotta do is reserve your seat in the description below. So when I get into this first hook, I really like playing with space. So I'm gonna go ahead and, I think that would be a cool point to just quiet everything out for a second before it repeats the line. So let's listen to that back. Right before I get into this verse, we'll drop the drums up. Intros need to be very quick when we're building out the track. And a lot of the times what I like to do is introduce elements that might play later on in the track. So if it's like a lead melody, or maybe it's a piano that really brings us out to the sting, I test a couple of things out to see how it sounds with those instruments that come in later in the track. So I'm gonna make a duplicate of this. I'll drag it over right now. Cool, so something I like to do is add little fills. So this is the fill we pulled in from Splice. I'm gonna go ahead and mix this, and this is what the entire track sounds like.